嗨，亲爱的朋友，我们所爱的林书豪弟兄，他又再次回到我们当中了。每一次他回来，都会带来非常美好的生命故事来跟我们分享。而他有一段时间没有回到我们当中，这次他会带来什么样的故事呢？
我们都知道，在这2-3年当中，从 NBA 的门关起来之后，他去到了 CBA， 在那个地方，他经历了什么？这2-3年，他又学到什么样的功课？在这一系列的感觉上是挫败的里面，他借着这样的一个挫败，他生命又有什么样的一个突破跟成长呢？接下来的影片会告诉我们。
My whole life, I've always had this agreement with my mom. She knew how much I loved playing basketball, and so the agreement was, as long as I get straight A's, I could continue to play basketball. This was true in, elementary, middle school, high school. But I remember, after making it to Harvard, as I was getting ready to go to Harvard, my mom was like, "Hey, our rule still applies, right? You got to get straight A's to keep playing basketball, to be able to play on the basketball team." And I was trying to, warn her. I was like, I don't, Harvard's a different animal, Mom. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, but I'll do my best. I remember, fast forward a few months into my freshman year, I'm in the library at like 11 o'clock at night or midnight, and I'm around this table in the basement of the Harvard Library with 2 or 3 other students, and we're studying for this economics test the next day. And it just like dawns on me after like 10 to 15 minutes of being in this study group that like it was almost like they were speaking a different language, and I started to panic. Like I started to sweat. I started to get like really, really anxious. And I just like got up from the table, and and I was just so scared because I was like, dude, I'm definitely not getting an A on this test. I don't even think I'm gonna pass this test at this point. And so I'm running around the basement, trying to call my mom, hoping that she'll pick up. And it's around midnight at this point, and there's no reception. And so I'm like, okay. I run upstairs to the ground floor. I call my mom, and she picks up, and I'm just like, Mom, like, honestly, I'm definitely not going to get an A, but I don't think I'm going to even pass this test. And I remember it was just like silence, and those like 5 seconds felt like an eternity because I did not want to let my mom down, and I wasn't sure what she was going to say next. And that's when it really dawned on me that, it wasn't until my back was against the wall that I really learned what kind of relationship I had with my mom. It wasn't, until you really hit adversity in life that you really expose and reveal the depth of the relationships that you have around you. And I think that's just, the reason why I tell that story is because today what I want to talk about is just how my recent times of adversity have really exposed and revealed the depth of my relationship with God, or lack thereof. And so that's just something that I want to talk about today. And, in order to do that, I have to rewind 2 years to kind of talk about the last 2-year stretch that I've been through. As we were preparing for the 2020-2021 season, this is right after COVID, I made a decision to pass up on millions and millions of dollars and a lot of opportunities in the CBA in order to chase my NBA dream. And I remember, I ended up taking a $30,000 salary and just basically going back to the G League and saying, you know what, I believe I'm an NBA player. I'm going to go for this. And it was a lot for me in my 11th year to kind of give up everything that I had going for me. And a lot of people, a lot of my close friends and family and people on my business team, they disagree with my decision. But I was like, you know what? I want to prove that I'm an NBA player because I still believe I belong. And I remember, the G League came and went. We were the second best team. I was a league leader in points, a league leader in assists. I was the number one, most efficient shooter in the entire league. And people were telling me, it's a guaranteed contract. Media, my agent, like my teammates, my coaches, like everyone was just like, oh, it's a done deal. You're going to get a contract for sure. And I remember just a few days went by, a week went by, months went by, and I ended up not getting a contract. And I remember thinking to myself, like, you know, the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, the confusion, the sadness, like all those emotions. I mean, and at that same time, I was going through the worst personal tragedy that I had ever experienced, you know, in my, 30-something years of life up until that point. And I remember not only was I dealing with kind of just this shattered dream, but I was also dealing with this other, tragedy that, I'm not ready to share with the world yet. But I remember just being in tears for a week straight because of this tragedy. And I remember just feeling so drained. And at that point, I was physically exhausted, I was mentally drained, and I had a broken heart, really. It wasn't even at that point, it wasn't as much about not making the NBA, it was about this other thing. And so, I prepared, I decided, I'm gonna go back to the CBA, I'm gonna sign with the Beijing Ducks. And that led into the 2021-2022 season. And I fly over to China, I'm in the quarantine hotel, and on day 3, I test positive for COVID. Long story short, I was in isolated quarantine for 3 months in a room much smaller than this room that I'm in right now. And it was just a tiny little room, no windows to see outside. For 3 months, I didn't feel, the sun touch my skin. For 3 months, I couldn't do laundry, and it was just, there was no delivery. It was such a tough experience for me. I ended up losing 20 pounds. And we were, I was on these tiny little, mats, sleeping on these mats. And I ended up having back spasms that were so bad that by the end of this, 3-month quarantine, I could not sit, I could not stand for more than like a couple minutes at a time without my back spasming. Like I spent basically all day just laying on my back, and I started to have this like depression where like I didn't even want to be awake. I would purposely try to sleep as much as I could, as late as I could. I remember the nurse coming in at like 3 p.m. I had not touched my breakfast, I had not touched my lunch, and the lights were off, and I was just laying there in bed, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And it was a really, really dark time for me. And so I started therapy. I found a therapist who, for the purpose of privacy, I'm going to keep unnamed throughout this entire sharing. But, I started going to therapy to address some of the things, the traumas that I was going through. I remember, as I got out of the quarantine, the 3-month quarantine, I ended up missing a huge chunk of my season. And for the rest of the season, I had my worst season on the court. By far, and that was really tough. And then off the court, it just continued to get worse, and I had family members, battling for their lives. Again, a lot of stuff happening in my private life that, I just want to keep private, but I was dealing with so much. And so that's what the last 2 seasons looked like for me. And I just remember after I finished last season, I was just so worn down and fatigued from adversity. And I'll never forget one of my close friends who I've been friends with for, the last 12 years. He's seen me do everything in my career. He's been by my side. I remember him, we've talked a lot about faith, about Christianity. And I remember him coming up to me and he said, Jeremy, I'll never believe in the God that you believe in because of the way that he treats you. And I remember, I had someone in my family, my extended family, come up to me and say, also, I see you try to give more and more of yourself to God every year, but he just makes your life worse. Like, he just makes it harder and harder. Like, why would I want to give more to God? I remember in both of those instances, it really it gave me that adversity back against the wall feeling of like, man, this is really revealing the depth of my relationship with God. And that's why, my therapist and I started talking a lot about this. And we knew my faith, my faith has always been genuine. It's something that was so real to me. But my therapist, she kept telling me, she was like, Jeremy, I feel like you put so much into your relationship with God, but it just hits so shallow. Like there's not enough depth to it. And, we talked about, for example, my devotionals during the season, for the last 12 years, actually last 16 years, like every day, I try to budget 45 minutes to an hour of just time with God. And, it's usually really structured. The first 10 minutes is this, and then we have some Bible reading, we have some prayer, we have, and I always structure these things. And then at the end of the season, at the end of every season, I don't do my devotionals, or I don't read the Bible or pray for a couple weeks. And my therapist was like, don't you feel like that's weird? Like God is supposed to be a safe space, a haven for you. But when you finish your season, you should go to God to get refreshed, but you actually run from God. Like that just shows you that something is off. And I remember also talking to my friend, Pastor Steve Chen, about it, and he was, and he was telling me kind of the same thing of just, he told me, he said, the only God you would need a break from is a false God. And that's when I started to really realize that my relationship with God has been too performative. It's been too legalistic. And I almost approached it like this obligatory list of things to complete or check off versus an actual relationship with God. And my therapist told me, she said, Jeremy, I want to help you find more depth in your relationship with God.
其实听到林书豪所分享的这几年在 CBA 或者是不管是在疫情当中所经历到的这样的一个挫折哦，其实真的是很心疼。很多的时候真的有这样的一个感觉哦，不是我们相信这位神，他就应该让我们的人生一帆风顺吗？这样的一个经历，其实真的让我感觉到，有的时候真的我们常常说我们相信这位神，可是其实我们是期待这个神透过我们相信他，能够祝福我们所要的梦想或者是成功可以发生。其实在这些的挫败当中，我相信林书豪他透过他的生命故事在告诉我们的是，其实神渴望他真正要的、真正渴慕的是神自己，而不是人所羡慕的成功跟名声跟所有这些人在追求的。有的时候我们真的搞不清楚，我们其实真的要的是神，还是要的是神给我们的祝福。
是我在看到他这个很真实的分享的时候，其实我觉得好触动我的心哦，因为他把他生命当中那个挣扎，甚至他的朋友说，如果神这样，你这么爱神，然后神让你经历这些事情，那我都不想要相信这个神。
哎呀，真的。
那可是其实我觉得说真的，每一个基督徒的生命当中，都是在挫折的里面，会让我们更深的探索我们的心，会让我们更深的思考我们的生命，也会让我们去跟神建立一个更深的关系。确实没有人喜欢挫折，没有人喜欢困难挑战，但其实这些困难跟挑战仍然可以成为一个化妆的祝福。所以我想到圣经里面这样讲说，要进到神的国之前，我们必定会经过一些的艰难，但是我们知道这个艰难它不是我们的目的地，它是我们的过程。但是我相信神至终是要把我们带进到他的荣耀、他的得胜、他的丰盛的当中。那其实我也觉得在林书豪在这个当中，他分享的一个很棒的事情就是说，他其实有求助，他愿意敞开分享他自己的生命的过程，去找諮商师。其实你知道，我们每一个人都很需要遇到困难的时候，那是为什么我们需要有基督的身体，我们需要有弟兄姐妹，我们需要有牧者，我们能够跟他们分享，敞开去寻求帮助。所以每一个挫折中的人都可以寻求帮助。
And so, this for the last 12 months, essentially, that has been the focus of all of my therapy sessions. And she said in order to do that, she took me through 4 different phases. And, in each phase, I'm going to, talk about each phase and what we had to address. But each of these helped me find another layer of depth in my relationship with God, so that it wasn't so much like this weight and this burden, but starting to find joy, lightness, ease, and fun in my relationship with God. And the first thing she told me, she said, Jeremy, I need you to slow down and process your life, process what's going on. Her whole point was, if you're too busy and you don't have the chance to slow down, you won't have connection in your relationship with God. And if you don't process what's happening, if you just try to sweep everything under the rug, and you don't actually like sit through your emotions and feel what you're supposed to feel, then you won't have true depth with God or with what's going on or with other people in your life. And so the first thing she told me to do was to slow down. And this was, a ton of, a whole bunch of different changes, but, I had to use different ways to empty my brain clutter. I had to, write down lists and I had to heavily limit my phone usage. I had to cut out a lot of my workload. I trained less hard and I implemented this Sabbath rule where every week there was a 24-hour stretch where I could not do any type of work. Like I couldn't do any work for 24 hours every week, for sure. And then, I was just thinking back when I was younger, I'd always be like posting on Instagram, like no days off, no days off, like no days off. And I was like, dang, that's like the dumbest thing ever. Like no days off? Like, why was I doing this hashtag? Like, it's impossible to take no days off because you either end up injured or burnt out, which I spent so much of my life and my career being injured or burnt out. And so we had to make so many different lifestyle changes for me to slow down. And I just remember this past summer when I went home, I vividly remember one of my family members coming up to me and saying, after a meal, and was like, you know what, Jeremy, like something's different. Like you're so present at meals. Like it used to feel like there was a billion things going on in your mind. It used to feel like you always had to check your phone or there was always someone trying to get a hold of you or you always had to get to something or there's always something that, somebody that you hadn't responded to. And they're like, for the first time, I really feel like you're just like present every day. Like you're present during the meal. And I was like blown away and also really sad that my family felt that way about me. And the second thing, we talked about slowing down, but we said also I had to process my emotions. And this is where my therapist really challenged me during our therapy sessions. We would do this technique called brain spotting. And she would really make me sit in my emotions, whatever they were that week. And, and I remember, last season I had this one game where I scored 0 points. And it was like, the most embarrassing game that I had had in recent years. And, the therapy session that week was like, okay, like, what do you feel? And I'm like, angry, duh. And she's like, sit there and be angry. And I'm like, no, I don't want to, and she made me sit in my emotions and do brain spotting. And we were just like, thinking about the anger, feeling the anger. And then she's like, what do you feel now? And I'm like, sad. And she's like, I want you to really feel the sadness. I'm like, no, can't we just move on to the next thing? Can't we problem solve? Can't we figure out how to, get to the next chapter, and flip the page? And she was like, Jeremy, I really need you to process your emotions and just be in them. It's okay. Even if you're angry, even if you're sad, I need you to process what's going on around you and not just always move on to the next goal. And so these two things, slowing down and processing what was going on, they helped me really connect more deeply with my life, with God, with the people around me. And that was the first phase that my therapist took me through. The second phase that she took me through was, and I don't know if this is because I grew up, AAPI or, I'm not sure, there's multiple reasons potentially, or if it's just my personality, but we had to unwire this scarcity mindset, right? And what is the scarcity mindset? That there's never enough, right? Growing up, it was like, if we went to a restaurant, there's no way I would be ordering soda or bottled water. It's like tap water. We don't have, that's a waste. No, we can't get any type of, soda or fountain drink or bottled water or sparkling water, right? Or, it would be if there's anything left over, there'd be 2 chicken wings or some free bread from Olive Garden. It's oh, we gotta take this all to go. Or, in basketball, growing up, it was always it always felt like I had to play well every single time. And no matter how well I did, it was never enough. And I always had to be better. And so I lived my life like this. And then I approached my relationship with God like this. I always had to prove, double prove, triple prove, keep proving. I had to earn my worth. I had to work and keep working for, to prove. I was never good enough. It always felt like I was running out of time. Like there needs to be more that needs to be happening. You need to be doing more. You need to be thinking harder. And it was like this like ghost. This like was always chasing me, and I was always just running. And I took that mentality and I approached my relationship with God. And I remember before one of my NBA seasons, one of the most famous teammates I've ever played with addressed our team the night before training camp. And he gave this speech, and he was like, you know what? This season is for us to prove that we're worth it. And he was like, if we don't do well, if we don't win games, like we don't deserve to exist. Like we're not worth anything. And I remember thinking, and it was this like 10-minute speech, and I was like, in the beginning I was like, yeah, like that's right. Like we gotta win games, we gotta prove everyone wrong. Like, we gotta show that we're worth, living. And then after a while I was like, hold on, like I don't know if that's right. I don't think that's right. And I realized that that might be helpful to, play better in basketball or whatever that mentality, but that's not the mentality that I could live my life with. I couldn't approach my relationship with God in this way where I was only deserved his love if I did well. I only was worth something if I was able to earn it and prove it today. And that's how I approach my devotionals. It's like, I have to do this structure, I have to do this, otherwise I'm a bad person, otherwise I'm not holy. And every day it was like, oh, I must check this off. And so we really worked on this whole scarcity mindset, and we had to rewire that and remind myself that like, in God, we have abundance and security. And there is enough, there's more than enough grace, there's more than enough love. And I don't live to prove that I'm worth something. I'm already worth everything to him, and that's why I can live freely and joyfully. And so this was just an entire perspective shift, almost like putting on a new contact lens for me. And I think a lot about Linsanity. People always ask me about Linsanity, like, oh, during Linsanity, like, why did you, why were you able to play so well? And a big reason is because D'Antoni, Coach D'Antoni, to me, I never felt like I had to it wasn't like every day I had to prove to him that I deserved to be on the court. I felt like he already believed that, and he would just be like, go just be you. Like, play out of the fact that you are already accepted and approved. Like, you are already good enough. You don't have to play every day to try to prove to me that you are good enough. The best example of that is after we had won 7 straight during the Linsanity stretch, we lost our 8th game against the Pelicans, and I had 9 turnovers, a career high 9 turnovers. After the game, he calls me, and I'm like, oh man, he's gonna yell at me. He's gonna tell me that I had way too many turnovers. I already know that, and I was just like nervous. And then he was like, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I'm just checking in on you. I'm like, whoa. And he's like, yeah, man, I just want to let you know, like, next game, go get 20 turnovers, because if you get 20 turnovers, you're gonna have 40 assists. Like, as long as you keep going downhill and keep playing your game, like, I can live with any result. Just do whatever you want. And I was just like, my jaw dropped. I was just like, is this serious? But it's because I had an abundant mindset that I was able to play free, live free, and have fun. And I think that's how God wants us to live and approach our spiritual life as well, right? I'm not saying that Bible reading and prayer and these things aren't important, but we don't do these in order to prove that we're worth something. We do these because we love him and we want to do them. And that was a huge perspective shift for me, that I was already good enough in God's eyes.
刚才林书豪分享到諮商師給他的第一個建議就是放慢腳步 slow down， 然後要 process， 要去思考。我覺得這個建議太好，也是我們每個人都需要的。為什麼？因為在忙碌的生活當中，你知道我們真的沒有時間去消化我們的情緒，沒有辦法好好的來思考。特別是很多的時候，我們就想要一些負面的情緒趕快過去，我們很急着就是接下來怎麼樣去進步，去做調整，然後呢，好像可以把 自己搞好一点。可是真的很多的时候，如果我们没有走过这一个放慢脚步的过程，其实我们没有办法真正去面对我们自己的内心。我觉得这个也是我自己要去学习的功课。
其实林书豪照着这个咨商师给他的建议，他去反思他的内心的时候，他就发现他里面有个匮乏的心态。当我听到他讲那个故事的时候，我就觉得太有趣了。就是他小时候去到餐厅，哇，什么东西都要打包。然后呢，可是这个心态看起来是节俭，可是其实在打球这件事情上面，他就发现他每一场球都一定要赢。他觉得他的价值是来自于他赢球，如果他输球的时候，就觉得好像自己不配活着。可是他发现他真正在Linsanity在林来疯的时候，是那个教练给他一个很大的安全感，就是当他犯错的时候也没有关系，他仍然是有价值的，仍然是宝贵的。当他反而在这种安全感的里面，在这样丰盛的心态里面，他反而能够有最好的表现。其实让我想到保罗，他也这样讲，他说：“我知道怎么样处卑贱，也知道怎么样处丰富，或饱足，或饥饿，或有余，或缺乏，随时随在，我都得了秘诀。那个秘诀就是靠着那个加给我们力量的主，我们凡事都能够做。所以，其实我们的力量不是来自于我们自己，是来自于主。”所以当我们知道主爱我们，所以靠着那个爱我们加给我们力量的主，我们凡事都能够做。还有，其实在腓立比书里面，另外也提到，他说神照着他荣耀的丰富，使我们所需要的一切都能够充足。所以让我们其实可以有一个丰富的心态，是神照着他荣耀的丰盛。神在我们里面，我们就是丰盛的。其实做得好，做得不好，其实我们都是有价值，都是宝贵的。
The second thing was to unwire the scarcity mindset. The third thing that my therapist kept challenging me on was she wanted me to learn how to be with God and not just be, and not just, perform, right? And I think John Mark Comer talks a lot about this. He says every Christian fundamentally needs to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. And my whole life, I was really good at becoming like Jesus and doing what Jesus did. That's how I was taught. Like, oh, cut this sin out of your life, cut that sin out of your life, and evangelize to the poor, and do this and do that, right? Like, I kind of had those two parts down. I was good at the whole, like, trying to become like Jesus and trying to do what Jesus did. I mean, I'm not perfect. I make lots of mistakes, but I'm saying that portion of it I had spent a lot of focus on. But this whole being with Jesus, right? Now that I know that Jesus loves me and and God loves me and that's enough, can I just be with Jesus? And I remember, there's this verse that really stuck with me, and it was, John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And this verse just says, like, God is just asking for us to abide in him. Not just to, like, become or do, but just to be. And that was something that I really tried to focus a lot on, was just being with Jesus. And it was really hard at first. It was really awkward at first. I would get really bored. My mind would space, and I still do that even now. But it was still something that I really had to learn how to do. And the best example of that was, I remember during the summer, my therapist would be like, I want you to just be with Jesus and not do anything. Just don't do anything. And I'm like, the first few times I was just sitting there like, this is so awkward. Like, and then I would start thinking about, like, oh, tonight I'm going to add truffle oil to my California roll for dinner, like random stuff. And I'd be like, oh, hold on. Like, and then I would find myself just like, oh, I got to do something. I got to accomplish something. And my therapist kept saying, like, I want you to just be with Jesus. And the best example, during this past summer, I remember I came home, and for whatever reason, like, everyone was gone from the house except for my mom. I just sat down to eat lunch, and then my mom came down. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna sit with you. I'm just gonna hang out with you. I was like, all right, cool. And we just hung out, we ate. Then after we ate, I don't even know what we did. Like, we listened to a little music. I ended up reading a little bit. I don't know, we talked, we definitely talked for some of the time, but we were kind of just being in each other's presence. And the next thing you know, 3 hours passed by. And I remember after those 3 hours, I was like, I think that's the first time in my life where I've really just really, really just chilled and been in my mom's presence with no agenda. There was nothing that we were doing, nowhere we had to go. We were just like, I don't know, we'll just be. And it just felt like I was so connected with my mom, and it was like this really cool thing. And my therapist was like, that's what it should be like with God. Like, you should be able to just be with God. And sometimes you guys should do stuff, for sure, but there are times where you should just be and not feel like you had to prove anything. And I remember after those 3 hours, my mom's like, okay, like, Jeremy, you need to move all these boxes, to storage. And I was like, and my mom was like, okay, we've had enough just hanging out. You need to do something now, which is, hilarious. And so like my mom, but, for those 3 hours, just to have been in her presence, I was just like, that was kind of an example of like what I want my relationship with God to look like more often. And so to recap, the first one was to slow down and process. The second one was to unwire this scarcity mindset. The third one was to learn how to be instead of do. And then the last one that my therapist really challenged me on was learn how to listen for God. I spent so much of my life praying, talking to God, but I never really gave him much chance to talk back. And I remember thinking, whenever people talk about, listen for God, I always kind of like get into this like, almost feels like voodoo, like what is like some voice supposed to, like I've never heard God's voice. Is he supposed to just talk to me, or is it supposed, and I've always had this weird, like, I don't really know how to do that. So I just keep praying. But I was thinking about like, in what relationship what healthy relationship would it look like if just one person just talked the entire time and that was it, right? And I realized that's what I'm doing with God. That's what I'm doing in my relationship. And so, my therapist was teaching me to pray and listen. And I fought her a lot on this, and I was like, how do I know these aren't just my own thoughts? How do I know these aren't just my own thoughts and and I'm tricking myself thinking that this is God speaking to me. And, I just had a lot of doubt and hesitation. And at this time I was also reading, some books. And I remember this author, Renita Weems, she said, prayer is not so much learning to write or talk to someone or some presence outside of yourself as becoming mindful of a conversation already taking place deep inside. And that's when I started to realize, like, man, God has given us, as believers, we have the Holy Spirit inside of us. And there's a conversation going inside of us. And sometimes God uses my thoughts. Sometimes God uses, other people. Sometimes God uses different things to speak to me. But definitely the way I think and the conversation going inside of me is definitely one of the ways that God speaks to me, and I need to be attentive and listen to it. And, Renita Weems goes on to say, listening for God is just like that. It's kind of a listening that requires you to stop, be patient, stay around a while, suffer the quiet, and learn how to listen for God speaking to us. And I think that's what my therapist was getting at, right? That's why she wanted me, to slow down, to process, to unwire the scarcity mindset, to be. I mean, that's what Renita Weems is talking about, is like, you must stop, be patient, stick around. It's okay for it to be quiet sometimes. It's okay for it to, be awkward sometimes, but it's in those moments that you learn how to listen to the still small voice of God. And after I started, giving God space to speak to me, I started to hear more. As I started to hear more, I started to feel more like a relationship. And it started to become more two-way and not just one way. Every day I had my prayer topics that I had to pray to God and then just go about my day. That's the checklist, fixed it, here we go. And I think just, that was a huge, a huge breakthrough for my spiritual walk. And so, what ended up happening as I went through these 4 different phases, I started to realize different, changes were happening within me. I started to, enjoy God more, and I was also connecting with other people more. I started to live a more rich life. Like, there was just more depth to my life. I started to enjoy my work more, like playing basketball or doing everything off the court. Like, there was like this enjoyment that I started to have, and I was like, oh, I don't dread these things. Like, I used to dread and hate these things, but I'm starting to like enjoy them now, and it was just this like, everything, just life started becoming easier and lighter. And my relationship with God started feeling more organic, more like free flowing. Like, it wasn't the same structure every day. There was just like a natural like ebb and flow to it. To wrap things up, I mean, I don't have it all figured out. I'm still on this path. My therapist is still helping me through, a 5th phase and different phases. And, which maybe I'll be able to talk about next year. But, I still struggle. There are days when things feel dry, when things feel obligatory. Of course, that's life. That's any relationship. And like I said, I still sometimes with Bible reading and prayer, I can still make it really performative and legalistic. But slowly I'm trying to unwire these things. And, and I think that has allowed me to feel just a freshness, that is in my day-to-day. And so going back to the Harvard story, I call my mom and I'm like, Mom, I don't even know if I'm going to pass this test. And after that long silence, my mom says to me, she says, "It's okay, Jeremy. Just do your best. Have you tried your best? Are you prepared? Are you doing everything you can? If you do that, we can accept whatever the result is." And that's when my back was against the wall. That's when I realized, my mom loves me regardless of how well I do on this test. And if my mom loves me that much, how much more does God love me? But how much of my life have I approached God like this, bitter, angry, judge who is ready to just pounce on me for every mistake, and just I always had to try to do a little bit more to earn his approval, right? How much of my life have I approached God like that? But how much different is he? Is he not a heavenly Father who is smiling down upon me, or who is already within me and here and near, right? Is he not, a Father who is willing to patiently walk with me through my mistakes, to help me, to guide me, to love me? Shouldn't there be this joy, this lightness, this fun aspect of my relationship with him? And I think that's what life boils down to. Life essentially is, love relationships. Life essentially is going through different journeys and different seasons of life with the people that you love the most. That's what makes life so purposeful. That's what we all want. That's what we all crave. And so as I'm on this journey, I am starting to see God more and more like a father, who is always there with me, who is always by my side, someone that I can talk to about anything, and someone that I can talk to who hears me, who listens and speaks back. And so that's kind of the journey that I've been on over this past year. Hopefully that encourages you guys. Thanks so much for listening.
我真的非常喜欢林书豪在这一段里面分享到约翰福音15章里面这个经文说，主是葡萄树，而我们是枝子。如果我们常在他的里面，他就常在我们的里面，我们就能够多结果子。因为离了他，我们其实就不能够做什么。其实真的让我们更多的在主的里面。就是很多时候我们一直在繁忙一些外面的事情，我们好像把我们的行程排得满的。可是其实在那个时刻，好像我们人看起来在那里。可是也甚至我们可能在读经跟祷告，可是我们的心其实不在那里。甚至很多时候我们跟我们的父母亲在一起，我们跟我们的妻子丈夫在一起，跟我们的孩子在一起，跟我们所爱的人在那里，我们人坐在那个地方，可是其实不在那里。我们的手不停在滑手机，在想着下一个行程，想着之前的事情，可是其实怎么样子的在那个地方，然后呢，甚至就是在基督的里面，其实这个是真的让我们很重新得力的。好像林书豪讲到，单是跟妈妈在那边聊天3个小时，其实他的心就觉得好满足。就是妈妈接下来说好啦，该是搬箱子的时候，他也会很开心的搬箱子。所以我觉得在那个同在的当中，跟人的同在，跟你所爱的人同在，在跟神同在，都是非常美好的一件事。
真的，他第4个讲到的，其实跟第1个也有点关联哦。第4个其实就是要聆听神说话，是因为很多的时候，其实我们在祷告，其实好像是单方向的，我们就讲我们要讲的，我们祷告我们要祷告的东西，可是我们从来没有预留时间来对我们的祷告来回应，或者对我们的生命说话。所以其实第1个建议，如果还记得的话，其实讲到的是要放慢我们的脚步，等于说我们的时间要留白啊。要有留空闲的时间，或者是我们常在教会里面讲到的，要在安息的里面，我们才能够聆听。有的时候，我们的心在一个很浮躁的状况当中，其实我们根本没有时间来听。那说真的，对我们现在的一个生活习惯，要聆听不是那么容易，因为你真的需要让你的心可以静下来，而且要预留时间。所以有的时候很尴尬，有的时候我们没有排任何东西，说我要听神对我说话的时候，那种感觉，好像你就开始想接下来要办什么事，待办事项，那 中午要吃什么，去哪里买菜，哪一家餐厅，就很多的东西都会出现。直到这些东西都慢慢的静下来之后，你就发现其实神非常渴望跟我们说话，神渴望跟他的儿女说话，神渴望把他的想法放在我们的里面，用各种我们可以理解的方式帮助我们。有很多的时候，其实我们在读圣经的时候，好像我们在读神的话，可是其实我们的心真的是在想很多其他的东西。这是一个非常好的鼓励，也是一个很好的操练。就是有的时候其实不是灵修，也不是祷告，也不是唱诗歌，其实就是安静在神的面前，然后等候他，让他对我们说话。有的时候那个话语一来，你知道我们整个的心境、我们的情绪，很多这些东西都完全的改变。所以我真的要说，这是一个非常有智慧的一个建议哦，让我们的属灵生命不再是照表操课的一个纪律，让我们的生命是一个非常自然，而且非常互动性，而且是活泼有生命力的，不再是一个宗教，不再是一个教条，不再是一个义务责任，而是一个享受的关系。
Amen, Amen, Amen。亲爱的朋友，其实我真的非常非常的喜欢，也感动林书豪弟兄他的见证。我们一直都知道他是一个非常爱神、非常热爱传福音的一个人。但是在过去的这几年当中，我们很多深爱林书豪的人，其实都在为他祷告，也有很多的担心，因为其实我们知道他从 NBA 到 CBA， 而且在 CBA 当中又遇到了很多的困难跟挑战，甚至在这次的见证当中，他讲到那3个月被关在一个小房间的里面，那真的是一个对身心都是一个很大很不容易的一个时刻。但是其实就在这样的挫折，就在这样子一个沮丧的当中，好像在人看为是好大的艰难当中，可是他里面却进到他生命当中，却进到一个最美的旅程的当中，是神让他慢下来，是神让他去探索他内在里面一些可能不健康的心态跟情绪，就像好像匮乏的心态这样子，而让他能够更多的在基督的里面。所以亲爱的朋友，今天我相信当你在挫折当中的时候，请知道你在神的眼中是非常宝贵的，你随时都可以来到神的面前来领受他的爱，让住在神的里面，也让神住在你的里面。我相信在这个挫折当你慢下来的时候，其实神也正在你的生命当中再重新的调整你的步伐，再重新的塑造你的内心。而在这个过程之后，我深相信你要进到神国度的荣耀跟得胜的当中，有美好的事情在前面等待着你。如果你正在挫折当中的，今天林书豪弟兄这么敞开的分享，我想要透过这个机会为你来祷告。在荧幕前面的每一位弟兄姐妹，如果你正在这个挫折、在困难当中的，好不好？让我们一起低头来祷告。亲爱的天父，我们何等的感谢你，主，谢谢你今天差派你的孩子来到我们当中来分享他生命当中的故事，他的挣扎，他的不容易。主，今天让我们知道，我们随时可以到你施恩的宝座前，我要得连续蒙恩惠，让你做我们生命当中随时的帮助。纵然在各样的困难当中，主，让我们的眼睛不会看错。我们知道，主啊，各样美善的恩赐，各样全备的赏赐，都是从你来的，在你没有改变，也没有任何转动的影儿。主，我恳求你，让每一位弟兄姐妹，我们真的生命中能够慢下来。耶稣，主啊，让我们能够去调整我们的心态，主啊，让我们更多的在你的里面，而且更多来聆听你的声音。主，你温暖、慈爱、有力量的声音，要引导我们前面的道路，帮助每一位弟兄姐妹度过难关，进到得胜的人生当中。主，我们谢谢你，求你与每一位弟兄姐妹同在，加力量给我们，帮助我们，主要使我们得胜，使我们突破。主，我们感谢你，我们爱你，我们跟随你。这样祷告，奉主的名求，阿们。愿上帝能够大大的赐福给你。